Joyce, Ben, Glenn. Is it done? Is it ready? It's okay. Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, yay. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm really excited about today because we have two of my favorite spiritual guys in the world in the same room. This is Reverend Rich Toffel. He is the pastor of Church of the Holy City. And I think of Rich as being someone who is extremely creative and innovative in the space of not just spirituality, but also political thought. And I count on Rich almost daily to help me stay sane. But yeah, so Rich is here. And we have Venerable Yan Sunim, founder and leader of Junto Society, and he is one of the most respected Buddhists in the world today. And he's done incredible humanitarian peace and climate work around the world. And he is also someone who's extremely insightful and innovative in how he thinks about society at large. And so they both Reverend Toffel and Sunim can think with very big lenses and also think very practically about how we should live our lives. I think that's extraordinary when people can think with such big lens and a small lens. And so I really enjoy talking to both of them about politics and about how I should live my life. So today's discussion is coming at a time when there's a lot of turmoil going on in the United States, in South Korea, where they just had an election after an impeachment and an attempted martial law. And of course, in the United States, it feels like there's a lot of chaos, as we all know. So I just told Venerable this a few minutes ago that I've never felt this discouraged since I've known him, and we've known each other since 2007. And it just kind of taking my breath away. And so I would like to ask questions right now about what they're thinking about, what is actually happening, get us grounded, and what do we do? How should we live? Rich, do you want to start?
I think Venerable should start.
Venerable should start. Okay. Okay, so the question goes to Venerable first.
우리가 경험했던 전 시기하고 비교한다면 변화의 속도가 좀 빠르다고 할 수 있겠습니다.
So it is true that the pace of change has accelerated compared to what we have previously experienced.
전에 경험하지 못했던 것도 또 경험하게 됩니다.
So we are experiencing what we have not previously experienced.
첫 번째가 기후 변화, 기후 위기입니다.
The first thing that we are experiencing in real time is the climate change.
우리가 역사적으로 이런 것을 경험해 본 적이 별로 없습니다.
So these are rare experiences for a humanity to have historically.
그러다 보니까 심각한 위기인데도 또 위기를 못 느낄 수도 있고.
So in that sense, we might not appreciate the seriousness of the experience we're having.
또 처음엔 또 몰랐어. 실제보다 더 큰 어떤 위기 의식을 가질 수도 있습니다.
At the same time, our threat perception might be outsized compared to the actual threat.
우리가 지난번에 코로나 팬데믹 때 보여준 모습을 생각해 보면요.
If we recall back to the reactions we had to the pandemic, COVID,
처음에는 이 위험을 잘 몰랐습니다.
in the beginning, we weren't too aware of the dangers,
그래서 방치했습니다.
so we let it be for a while.
두 번째는 또 너무 많이 놀랐습니다.
The second, we were shocked and maybe we overreact
그걸 지나치게 대응을 했습니다.
and we overdid it.
그래서 막 모든 이동을 중단하고
So we stopped and put quarantine on every activity
모든 부분이 거의 중지되다시피 했습니다.
and stopped all kind of activities.
이제 이렇게 또 경험을 하고 나서 지금은 위험은 있지만은 그 위험을 관리할 우리의 이제 여유가 생겼습니다.
That through that experience, we developed the capacity to recognize the dangers of the risk, but to also mitigate and manage those risks.
그런 것처럼 기후위기도 우리가 좀 더 이렇게 내용을 분명하게 알면 어느 정도 관리할 수 있지 않을까 싶습니다.
So likewise, as we learn, even climate change, we might develop the capacity to manage it.
그러나 제가 생각할 때는 시험보다 우리는 위기의식을 잘 못 느끼고 있어서 지금 대응이 제대로 안 되고 있다고.
But for now, I think we are not truly appreciating the criticality of climate change. So that's why we're not managing it well.
10년, 20년 지나면 아마 심각한 그런 어떤 부작용이 나타나고 위험이 달해하면 그때 이제 어떤 대응을 하지 않을까 싶습니다.
So I think we'll really come around to trying to deal with it after 10 years or 20 years when we actually experience the fallout from the climate change.
어쩌면 그때는 또 너무 늦어서 제대로 대응을 못할 수도 있습니다.
It might be too late for us to do anything about it then.
그러면 이제 두 번째는 국제 질서입니다.
The second is the world order.
우리는 2차 세계대전 때 많은 혼란을 겪었습니다.
So we experienced this worldwide chaos during World War II,
너무나 많은 사람이 죽었습니다.
and so we lost a lot of people.
이런 걸 하면서 우리는 깊이 반성을 했습니다.
And through this, we went through a phase of reflection.
그래서 국제연합이라는 유엔 기구를 만들고 인류가 공동으로 대응하기로 했습니다.
And we created, a global organization so that we can collectively act against it.
그래서 어떤 세계 질서를 이렇게 미국 중심으로 해서 세계 질서를 만들었습니다.
And with the U.S. leading the charge, we constructed this world order, basically a world global governance construct.
물론 소비에트와의 갈등으로 냉전 시대를 겪었지만 그러나 큰 틀에서는 미국이 중심이 된 국제 질서라고 볼 수 있습니다.
Also, although we did experience a Cold War with the Soviet Union, in a big perspective, it was U.S.-centric global order.
공산주의가 붕괴되고 또는 동유럽이 붕괴되고 더욱더 미국 중심의 국제 질서가 수립이 됐습니다.
And with the end of Cold War and coming down of the the Soviet, we even became even more U.S.-centric.
근데 지금 미국이 나서서 지금까지 우리가 형성해온 국제 질서를 지금 허물어뜨리고 있는 것 같습니다.
But now we see the original author of the global order trying to actually knock down the global author, the global order that it authored.
그러니까 우리는 지금 당황하고 있습니다.
And that is surprising to us and we are shocked.
지금까지 이 질서에 익숙해 있다가 이게 갑자기 허물어지니까 지금 어찌할 바를 모르는 거예요.
And we've been familiar and comfortable with this order, but now that it's being taken down and reformulated, we are confused.
그렇다고 어떤 새로운 질서가 세워진 것은 아닙니다.
And we don't have a viable alternative yet.
이런 질서의 변화 시기라고 볼 수 있습니다.
So we are going through this transition period.
그래서 저는 혼란을 지금 많이 느낀다.
So I think that's why we as a global community are feeling this confusion.
그럼 혼란이라는 게 뭐냐는
Then
거예요.
what is the nature of the confusion?
혼란이라는 것은 세상에도 있지만은 우리들의 특히 마음에 있습니다.
So the confusion, exists outside, but also really lives inside of us, inside our own minds.
내가 이 세상을 보면서 세상은 이렇다 하고 내가 알고 있을 때는 정신은 혼란스럽지가 않습니다.
So when we have a certain perception, an angle, a framework through which we understand the world, we're not confused.
근데 이게 현재 내가 알고 있는 그런 어떤 시스템, 사고로서 이 세상이 이해가 되지 않을 때 우리는 혼란스럽게 느낍니다.
But when the existing reality goes against our existing framework for perceiving and understanding the world, then we are confused.
그러니까 세상은 혼란스럽지 않고 세상은 좀 빨리 변한다 이렇게 표현하는 게 저는 옳다고 생각합니다.
So I think it's more accurate to explain the world not as chaotic, but as changing fast.
근데 우리가 세상을 이해하는 것이 지금 이 변화를 제대로 이해하지 못하니까 우리가 지금 혼란스럽게 느끼는.
But we are confused internally because there's a lag between the pace of change we're experiencing and our understanding of it in order to reformulate our framework.
그래서 우리가 이 변화된 세계를 그에 맞게끔 바르게 인식하는 그런 자세가 필요하지 않느냐.
So I think we need a approach to want to understand the pace of change in this world.
나의 인식을 고집하게 되면 세상이 옛날식으로 돌아가야 내가 안정감을 느낍니다.
Because if we insist on holding on to the old framework of understanding the world, we'll only find peace when the world changes back to its previous iteration.
그래서 이 대응 방법은 두 가지가 있습니다.
So there are only two ways to adjust.
하나는 내가 옛날에 인식했던 그 세계로 세상을 되돌려 놓는 것이고요.
One is revert the world back to the previous order that I understand through my existing framework.
다른 하나는 지금의 변화된 세계를 새로운 인식의 틀로 그걸 있는 그대로 이해하는 겁니다.
The second alternative is for me to change or reconstruct my framework of understanding the world to fit the current reality.
어떤 것을 선택할 거냐 문제가 아니라 우리가 심리적 안정을 찾으려면 이렇게 될 때 안정을 찾아진다는 말씀입니다.
So I'm not saying you have to make a choice either or. Is that I'm trying to say when we achieve that reconstruction of our internal lens, then you can find peace.
그러면 나이가 많거나 경험이 많은 사람일수록 이럴 때는 혼란을 많이 느낍니다.
So, the more experienced you might be, the more world you have lived, you might feel even more confused.
어린아이들은 과거에 그런 어떤 고정관념이 없기 때문에 원래 세상이 이런 줄 알 수 있습니다.
If you're born today and raised today, this is the world. So you're already used to this world as being this world.
그래서 결론적으로 말씀드리면 변화된 세상을 우리가 조금 더 이해하는 그런 어떤 인식의 틀을 좀 조정하는 게 필요하지 않나고 말씀드립니다.
So I think my suggestion is that I think we need a flexible approach to kind of wanting to reformulate our lens by which we understand the world to fit the current world.
그리고 이 변화가 잘못됐다고 생각한다면 원래의 모습으로 되돌리는 사회적 실천 활동이 필요합니다.
Then if you believe that this current change is wrong, then you need to act, engage and act so that you want to undo the change you think is wrong.
그러니까 어떻게 인식하고 어떻게 행동할 거냐의 문제이지 불안해하는 것은 아무 도움이 되지 않습니다.
So in a way, this really becomes a matter of how you want to perceive and how you want to act based on that perception. And being anxious about it doesn't help.
네, 이렇게 거기까지 말씀드리겠습니다.
And with that, I'll conclude my response.
Same question?
Yes, same
Let
question.
me just start by saying, Venerable, it's such an honor to be in your presence and to have you here in our new space. And there are times in life when you get to be around a holy man, and this is one of them. So we're all very grateful to be in your space, your presence. Okay, so you took us through the pandemic, the global unraveling that's taking place as the US has left the world, the climate change crisis that we're all experiencing, and the fact that things are moving so fast that nobody can really keep up with what's going on. And having been involved, like you, in both spirituality and politics and policy, what's been helpful is understanding what I would describe as spiritual. And at least from our tradition, we see humanity is evolving too, and we have to evolve our spirits for this time that we're in. In our country, the primary challenge that I perceived is, as Venerable was saying, is a perception challenge. In our country, we have three dominant perceptions that I've engaged with. One is called the more traditional worldview that sees the world through the Holy Scripture, the Holy Text. Both of us are spiritual folks, so we're actually in that. We honor the tradition, we honor the past, and we believe in sacred texts and things that you can't see and measure necessarily. And that's a way of looking at the world, that's a way of looking at truth. What's in the Scripture is true. That worldview served for thousands of years in the world until we have the modern worldview. And the modern worldview, and we were just talking before at dinner to a scientist, that's really the scientific way of looking at the world. What can I see? What's true is what I can measure, what I can see, what can be proven. And it's created capitalism, it's created the free market economy and science. So some amazing things that the modern world has done, particularly if you think about how it's dealt with illnesses, for example, and the great world that has done. But it's also focused on the here and now. How much money can you make? That kind of thing. And status. And so that worldview has its own truth, the partial truth that we all sort of live in. And then there's a third, more emerging worldview that I see, which is the postmodern worldview. And that worldview sees everything from my experience. And your experience is your experience, my experience is my experience. It's very popular in college campuses, it's very popular among the young. And it basically, I see a lot of the conflict that we're facing right now is three different ways of coming to truth in our world, in conflict for the first time. And then globally, I think that I would agree with you that the United States did something really great after World War II, which was look at international institutions. But after a while, the American people basically said, we're doing all this for them, what about us? And looked more internally and more isolationist. And I think that will have very bad effects because I think we are in a global community more than we've ever been. And if the United States steps away from that, I think dark forces will step into that role. And it will be more chaos, more war. So I would say that is also another driving thing. I think on the issues of climate change or any of the social change issues, we're going to have to bring in all those worldviews together to create coalitions to solve them, both in the United States and globally. So that's how that's the big picture of how I'm looking at the conflict that we're in now. We call the United States a culture war, and it's intensifying to the point where right now we're no longer just disagreeing, we're hating each other. And that eventually is going to lead to a culture of, it leads to a culture of contempt, and contempt will eventually lead to violence. And I think we as spiritual leaders need to argue for a culture of compassion and make the case that compassion is a much more successful way to work together.
So I love that there's so much overlap between what you two are saying. But there's part of me that resists what is maybe too inclusive. Like I feel like we need some way of really being able to maintain our sense of moral clarity. And if we focus on inclusion and respecting multiple perspectives, I'm afraid of losing connections with like my moral instinct. And so how do you balance the two? Like, I want to be compassionate towards people that I think are, I don't know, being immoral or evil. But at the same time, I feel the need to protect people who are being harmed. So how do you balance like being inclusive and compassionate and being protective and morally just? Um, mhm. Yeah.
This guy.
Okay, I'll go first. So you wanna be both inclusive, but you wanna have your moral standing and you wanna fight for what's right.
Mhm.
And how can you be including the bad guys? Is that what you're saying?
But not just the bad guys, I just mean, there are times when you have to make a choice between respecting someone and protecting someone who's being harmed by that person. So there's like such thing as real harm taking place right now. So how do we protect them? How do we protect
Yeah,
people?
so I would say on the question of people being harmed,
Mhm.
I think that's definitely true.
Mhm.
And I think we have to fight for what we believe is right and stand on our moral principles. And that particularly in the Christian tradition, but I think we share it, having read Venerable's materials, we want to fight for the disenfranchised, the people who don't have a voice. That's what we're called to do in the Christian tradition. We don't do a great job with it, but that is what the call of Jesus would be, is to fight for exactly that, fight morally for people who are the least of these
Mhm.
and in danger. So the question is then, if that's your call and you're going to take a moral stand, when does inclusion end? When do you just draw a line against
Yeah.
those? And I would say that that you want to hold that compassion for the groups that you're protecting. But if you're going to change the battle, if you're going to win the long-term battle, we live in a culture that believes that if we get meaner, we'll be more successful. If we get tougher against them, we'll win. And I would argue that the way to break the cycle of contempt is to actually see the world through their eyes, be empathetic, and not confuse understanding with agreement. That I'm not agreeing with you, but I want to understand where you're coming from, because only then can I communicate or create a strategy that will eventually defeat the people that I'm most afraid of. The danger is that we get very afraid and we kind of circle the wagons, we pull in, and we just demonize those we disagree with, which perpetuates a tit for tat, and it's gonna be a survival of the fittest. And that's the world I think we're trying to evolve away from.
목사님 얘기 동감합니다.
I fully agree with what Rich said.
사람은 전부 자기가 살아온 환경, 받은 교육 이런 거에 의해서 다 어떤 가치관이나 어떤 이런 것이 다 조금씩 다릅니다.
So everybody's a product of their upbringing, so education, whatnot. So we have slightly different value systems.
서로 다른 믿음을 가지고 있고,
We have different faith,
서로 다른 생각을 하고 있고,
different thought
서로
process,
다른 가치관을 가지고 있고,
different values,
서로 다른 어떤 사상을 가지고 있고,
different way of thinking.
이것을 우리가 다르다는 것을 인정하자.
So we have to recognize that we are different.
이것이
I think that is another name for respect.
다른 사람의 믿음이나 어떤 뜻을 존중하자 이 말은 그것이 옳다거나 그걸 받들자는 게 아니라 그걸 나와 다른 그것을 인정하자는 거예요.
So when you respect another person, I'm not saying you support his viewpoints or you deny his viewpoints, but you are acknowledging that you are different.
즉 틀렸다든지 잘못됐다가 아니라 다르다는 거죠.
So he's not wrong or incorrect, he's different.
그렇게 다르다는 것을 인정하게 되면 내 마음속에서 화가 일어나지 않습니다.
So if you recognize, acknowledge that difference, that does not trigger anger in your
잘못됐다 이럴 때 이제 화가 나는 거예요.
we trigger anger in our own hearts when we say you are wrong.
그렇게 되면 상대를 이제 조금 더 심하면 악마화한다 이렇게 말할 수 있어요.
That leads to demonization of the other.
그래 되면 이제 저런 건 없어져야 된다 이렇게 됩니다.
Then you say, then they don't deserve to be here.
그래서 능력도 합리화가 됩니다.
That justifies and rationalizes violence against them,
더 나아가면 죽이는 것도 합리화된다.
and even killing of them.
지금 곳곳에서 전쟁이 일어나는 것은 저들은 죽여도 마땅하다 이렇게 합리화되기 때문에 우리는 죽이는 행위를.
So a lot of conflict areas around the world, we allow ourselves to kill each other because we have rationalized that they deserve their death.
그래서 이것을 다름을 인정하게 되면 이제 화가 나지 않고 화가 나지 않으면 그들을 그대로 볼 수가 있습니다.
So if you acknowledge the differences, that it doesn't trigger anger in your hearts, and without anger, you can see them kind of for who they are.
거기서 한 발 더 나가서 그 사람들 입장에서는 그렇게 말할 수 있다, 그렇게 생각할 수 있다고 이해하는 거예요.
Then you go one step further and say, understand that from their perspective, they can say this or they can act in such a way.
그것이 옳다는 것이 아닙니다.
You're not saying that they're right.
그들의 입장에서는 그럴 수 있다.
You're saying that from their perspective, their position, they could do this.
저는 이것이 사랑이라고
And
생각합니다.
I think that's another name for love.
여기 이해 없는 사랑은 폭력이 됩니다.
Because love without that understanding is violence.
내가 너를 좋아한다 하는 것은 나의 일방적인 겁니다.
Because if I say I like you, that's arbitrary, right?
그의 믿음이나 그의 행위를 그의 입장에서 이해하는 것을 저는 사랑이라고
But
생각합니다.
I think love is really trying to understanding the other person from their perspective.
이렇게 될 때 우리 속에서는 내 마음과 주어지
So that,
하지만 내가 그 동의는 못할 수가 있어요.
but you can understand the other person doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree with them.
그럴 때 저는 자기의 의견을 얘기해도 된다고 생각합니다.
Then from that position, I think you are free to share your position or your thoughts.
그럴 때 그 행위는 폭력성이 없다는 거예요.
That sharing is not violent.
그래서 또 그것을 행동해도 된다고 생각합니다.
And I think from that place of love, you can act on your beliefs.
그래서 그것이 서로 다른 가운데서 저는 이것이 폭력적이지 않는 방식으로 서로 대화가 되거나 해결점을 찾아간다고 생각합니다.
So in midst of those differences, without violence, we can actually approach at a solution.
대화라는 것은 뭐 서로 합의할 수도 있고요.
You know, what's dialogue? Through dialogue, we can agree,
합의가 안 되면 따로 갈 수도 있고요.
or we can agree to disagree.
어떤 것이 정해질 수는 없어요.
There's no set conclusion to a dialogue.
지금 우리가 이런 관점을 가져야 내 마음에 평화도 오고 우리들의 관계도 평화가 오지 않느냐 생각합니다.
So I think this is the perspective we need to bring bear in our relationship to bring peace to our own minds, to also bring peace to our society.
그래서 저는 불교인이지만은 예수님의 가르침에 감동한 부분이 있습니다.
So as a Buddhist, I've been very emotionally touched by a lot of teachings of the Jesus.
그는 십자가에 못 박혀서 죽기 직전에 그를 못 박은 사람들에게 이렇게 말했다고 전해집니다.
The Bible tells us that he said this before when he was crucified.
주여 저들을 용서하소서.
Father, please forgive them.
그들은 자기 지은 죄를 모릅니다.
They know not what they do.
이게 무슨 뜻일까요?
What does that mean?
그들은 그냥 사형 집행인입니다.
Because he was mentioning the people who actually were the executioners.
요즘 말하면 교도소 직원이라고 말할 수
In a
있어요.
way, in today's world, they were a staff working the prisons.
그들은 자기가 죄 짓는다고 생각하지 않고 자기 직업을 그냥 행하는 겁니다.
And their perspective was that they weren't committing any sin or crime, they were just doing their job.
만약에 그들에게 벌을 준다면 얼마나 억울하겠습니까?
So if you were to punish them, they would feel wronged.
예수님께서는 나를 죽인 사람이라는 관점이 아니라 그들의 역할을 인정했다는 겁니다.
So Jesus did not see them as people who actually killed him, executed him, but he saw them as people just doing their job.
그래서 그들은 자기 죄를 모른다고 말했습니다.
That's why he said they know not what they do.
이런 관점이 저는 보통 사람의 한계를 넘어서 신의 마음이지 않느냐 싶습니다.
I think this goes beyond what normal people can understand. And this really speaks to a divinity within us.
저는 이것이 그가 사람인 동시에 신이 된 것이라고 봅니다.
So I think this is the moment that he showed us is both divine and human.
우리는 이렇게 되기가 어렵습니다.
It's very difficult for us to reach that.
그러나 우리가 신앙을 갖는다는 것은 그런 방향으로 나아가고자 하는 거라고.
If you believe in the faith, then it's upon you to want to go there.
근데 오늘날 이 신앙인들은 좀 다른 것 같습니다.
But the faithful today are a little different.
더 상대를 미워하고
You know, we hate each other more.
증오하고
We rage against each other.
또 때로는 폭력적으로 대응을 합니다.
And we're violent against the other.
세상의 많은 전쟁, 분쟁의 거의 대부분이 밑바닥에 종교가 있습니다.
You know, a lot of conflicts in the world, most of those conflicts are driven by sometimes differences in our religious faith.
그래서 그들은 자기가 믿는 어떤 교주의 가르침을 과연 따르는가 이런 자문이 필요합니다.
So we need to self-reflect whether we are actually following the teachings of our original teacher.
이런 자기 믿음에 대한 이런 반성과 자각이 중요하지 어느 종교를 갖느냐가 저는 중요하지 않다고 생각합니다.
So I think what's important is for us clergy is that, or those faithful, is that for us to reflect upon our own faith and repent upon our own faith rather than trying to argue against it.
오늘날 사회에서 여러 어떤 극단적인 행위의 대부분이 종교에 비롯되고 있다는 참 아이러니합니다.
So it's ironic that a lot of extremism that we see around the world is rooted in religious faith.
Thank you. So I would like to invite you to ask each other questions. I have many more questions, but do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Yeah.
Okay, my first question is, following up on what you just said, and looking at your biography and reading up on you, I know that at one point you were imprisoned under dictatorship. And you said that during that experience, you had a shift. You had sort of hatred for the government, I guess, for the guards and the police state. And you had a spiritual shift within that experience where you said, I came to see the world through the eyes of the people who had you in prison. And I think that demonstrates what you're just talking about. And you and I are both advocating for this compassionate argument, but how do you respond to someone who says, well, that's weakness, what you're doing? You're creating danger. You're not protecting people. You're rationalizing, you're justifying those guards that imprisoned you. You're not, you're responding in love, but love is weak. And what's stronger is being morally right and fighting. How do you respond to that natural desire that everybody has, that they want to fight back and they do want to make it clear they're wrong, I'm right?
저는 그런 경찰에 가거나 고문을 당하거나 이런 일이 있을 거라고 한 번도 생각해 본 적이
I
없어요.
never thought I'd be arrested and tortured
난 착하게 살기 때문에.
because I was living a good life, okay, as a good person.
근데 어느 날 내가 그런 상황에 놓였어.
Then one day I found myself in that situation.
그래서 이 세상에 사는 사람 누구나 다 예기치 못하게 이런 상황에 직면할 수가 있다고 생각이 들었습니다.
So at that point, I realized that anybody in this world could find themselves in such a situation.
이런 고문하는 시스템이 있는데 내가 거기 안 가는 것이 중요한가? 고문하는 시스템이 없는 게 중요한가? 이 문제입니다.
So the question becomes, is it important to not have a system of torture, or is it more important for me to not fall into that system of torture?
나는 처음에는 나만 안 가면 된다고 생각했어요.
At first, I thought, as long as I'm not affected, it's fine.
근데 그것이 오늘날 내가 그 일을 당했어.
Then one day, I was affected.
그렇기 때문에 이러한 그들을 이해함으로 해서 그들에 대한 분노는 없지만은 이러한 시스템은 없어야 된다고 생각했어요.
So by understanding their perspective, my rage at them disappeared. But at the same time, my will to eradicate the system of torture was strong.
그들을 미워하고 증오한다면 그들 개인에 대한 복수로 나아갈 겁니다.
If I were to hold on to that hatred and rage, I would have tried to avenge myself on them.
아니면 뭐 그런 것을 존재하게 하는 그룹에 대한 나의 복수겠죠.
Or to avenge myself on the group that enabled them.
저는 그래서 어떤 혁명이 다른 그 희생, 복수를 치른다고 생각합니다.
And that would have led to another cycle of violence.
그래서 내 마음, 그들을 미워하는 마음은 없지만 저는 이 제도는 없어져야 된다고 생각해. 그게 제가 사회에 참여한 동기였습니다.
So I know I did not hold any rage or anger towards them, but it solidified my belief that such a system should not exist. And that really triggered my work as an activist.
그래서 이러한 어떤 그 차별이라든지 어떤 이런 것들은 우리가 회피하지 말고 개선하는 데 저는 힘을 모아야 된다고 생각합니다.
So instead of avoiding discrimination that we see, I thought that we should collectively try to eradicate the discrimination we see.
분노를 하게 되면 짧은 시간에 큰 힘이 나오는 건 사실입니다.
So it is true that anger gives us strength in the short term.
그래서 그것을 성공하게 되면 어떤 만족을 느끼고요.
And if you manage to succeed, then you feel that, that satisfaction.
그것이 성공하지 못하면 굉장한 패배감을 느낍니다.
But if you don't succeed based on that anger, then you feel that despair.
그런데 이 분노 없이 만약 이런 일을 해나가면
But if you engage in action without anger,
이 목표가 달성될 때까지 저는 꾸준히 할 수 있다고 생각합니다.
it allows us to be more consistent and sustainable in our act to transform.
저는 이것이 약해진 거라기보다는 평화적 방법으로 그리고 끝까지 할 수 있는 힘이 아닌가 생각합니다.
So this is not the weakness, this is a strength for us to sustain our effort at transformation.
그래서 어떻게 보느냐에 따라서 약해졌다 이렇게 평가할 수도 있지만 저는 약해졌다는 평가보다는 지속적으로 할 수 있는 힘을 가졌다 이렇게 생각합니다.
So from the critics' perspective, they see that as weak. But from my perspective, I see that as giving me the strength to sustain my transformation efforts.
그럼 저도 하나
Then
물어보겠습니다.
I have a question.
지금 트럼프 대통령이 당선되고 미국 사회뿐만 아니라 전 세계가 많은 지금 혼란을 겪고 있습니다.
So, with Trump's election, not just in the US, but, throughout the world, there is confusion.
저는 이것이 나쁘다 좋다가 아니라 기존 질서를 무너뜨리기 때문에 오는 문제라고 생각합니다.
So I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm saying that this confusion is a result of the old world order that we are used to kind of transforming or giving way.
그럼 2차 세계대전이 끝나고 지금까지 거의 80년이 흘렀습니다.
So it's been about 80 years since the end of World War II.
사회가 많이 바뀌었습니다.
The world has changed.
어떤 일부는 새로운 시스템도 필요합니다.
And maybe we do need a new system partially.
이것이 새로운 시스템으로 가는 어떤 시작인지 이것이 기존의 시스템을 파괴함으로 해서 더 나쁜 결과를 가져오는 쪽으로 갈지 어떻게 목사님 어떻게 봅니까?
So do you think that this is a start of a transition into a new system of world's order? Or is this really leading to a destruction of the old world order that will lead to even more chaos?
물론 평가는 이 시기를 지나가야 합니다.
Of course, the results we'll only know once we have lived through this period.
몇십 년 지난 뒤에 되돌아본다면
If you were several decades from this moment and looking back,
변화된 사회를 반영한 새로운 시스템으로 가는 출발이었느냐?
Was this the start of a new system that we were reconstructing?
아니면 사회가 다시 세계대전이나 뭐 더 치열한 경쟁으로 가는 어떤 혼란으로 가는 어떤 시작이냐 평가가 될 겁니다.
Or was this the start of the dissolution of a system that would lead us back to the chaotic world of the early 19th century?
물론
20th
지금은
century?
우리가 이걸 알 수는 없습니다.
So we can't know for sure right now.
그러나 미국에 사시면서 미국 시민들의 어떤 요구나 요청, 변화 이런 걸 보시면서 어떻게 보십니까?
But you living here and being with people and listening to them and their demands, their concerns and anxieties and questions, what do you think?
우린 여기 살지 않으니까 이게 약간 혼란스럽게 느껴져.
So because we don't live here, sometimes we feel confused.
그러나 여기에서 이런 일이 일어났다는 것은 뭔가 여기 요구가 있었다는 거예요.
But the fact this is happening now here means there was a demand for this to happen here.
도대체 무슨 시민들의 요구가 있었길래 이런 정도가 들어서고 이렇게 가는 것이 이런 일이 일어나는가 하는 것이.
So what was the collective demand of the American people that led to this government and the changes that this government is effecting?
너무 어려운 질문이
Was that too difficult?
그냥
Yes.
가볍게 생각해 보면
Yes.
So my guess is that, well, I'll just share an example. Right before the election of 2016, I did an interview with a German reporter and said, what do you think will be different for Germany after the election? And I said at the time, whether Hillary Clinton wins or Donald Trump wins, I would say if you're a country on the border of Russia, you're in trouble. So we think of this as a Trump phenomenon, but it was brewing in both political parties in our country, a feeling of we're tired of supporting countries that we did after World War II. Korea, very successful financially, very successful businesses. I drive a Korean car, so it's, tremendously successful. Germany is a leading competitor. And so why are the American public was saying in both parties, why are we spending our military and our soldiers to be over there when they're doing fine and what benefit do we get from it? I'd say added to that, just before this, George W. Bush took a very aggressive foreign policy that said we need to bring democracy to the world. And with the invasion of Iraq, which we found out in retrospect was very poorly informed and not poorly executed and created, I think, destabilization of the Middle East, the American public became more dissatisfied. Why are our soldiers dying in Iraq? Why are our soldiers dying in Afghanistan? Why are young men doing this? Why are we the policemen of the world? What do we get for it? Meanwhile, these countries are doing financially very well. And I live in, middle America where we don't have proper streets. Our kids are using fentanyl. The jobs have been exported to China and other countries. So we've lost out on this globalization. And so let's stop it. So it wasn't just Trump. I think it was in both parties. The internationalist wing of both parties survived probably in Joe Biden, in the Democratic Party, but not much deeper than that. And the Republican Party and say like a Mitt Romney who didn't succeed. So that worldview of being internationally engaged, free markets, global competition, and America being a police force in many cases around the world, that lost steam. I think personally also, I tend to be an internationalist myself, so I see great chaos coming from this pullback that we're now engaging in. I think there'll be many, many new wars because of our pulling back that will cost us more time, money, energy, and lives in the future. So I personally don't think it's a smart strategy, but I do understand the other perspective. And I think that's how they would argue it. And when something has worked for a long time, as the international order did, you take it for granted that we don't need it, we don't need to do it anymore. And it's just not an appreciation of what it is to maintain something that's working until you lose it. So there will be an education for the United States right now about what happens when we withdraw and we watch other people step in, who I would say, for example, China. I believe that's what Russia is doing. I believe Iran and Turkey, other countries will be making moves, North Korea. And so I think it creates a more dangerous world. And I think we'll learn that through experience, unfortunately. And but I think that's what brought us this new world order. And it'll remain to be seen if it lasts. It has historical precedent in the United States. Before World War I and even before World War II, there were strong isolationist movements in the United States, particularly on the right. So that it has a history in our country that we're isolated, we don't need it. Let's protect our country. Let's make a golden dome, protect ourselves, and let them fight out their battles, which I think will have disastrous consequences, but that's the way that we're gonna learn as a country, I think. So that would be my take.
네, 미국이 세계에 가장 큰 영향을 행사하다 보니까 미국의 문제인 동시에 세계의 문제예요.
Because US wielded so much force and influence around the world, this is essentially a US problem that has become a global problem.
우리는 지난 몇 달 동안 한국에서도 많은 정치적 혼란이 있었습니다.
So in the last couple of months, South Korea experienced a lot of political chaos.
그런 혼란이 한국의 혼란이었지 미국의 혼란은 아니잖아요.
But South Korean political chaos was South Korean political chaos. It did not lead to US political chaos.
근데 지금 미국의 이런 혼란은 전 세계의 모든 사람들이 그 혼란에 경험을 하게 돼요.
But when US experiences a political chaos, the whole world experiences a chaos.
그래서 미국의 안정이 또한 지금 세계의 안정이 되고 있습니다.
Or conversely, political stability in the US brings about political stability for the rest of the world.
이것은 미국이 세계에 우리는 영향을 주고 싶지 않다고 말한다고 해결되는 건 아닙니다.
And so this, just because US wants to be an isolationist doesn't mean they can be an isolationist.
이미 세계가 미국 중심으로 지금까지 움직였기 때문에.
Because until now, for the past several decades, the world moved with America at its center.
그래서 가능하면 미국 시민들은 미국의 이익인 동시에 전 세계의 이익이 될 수 있는 길을 찾았으면 좋겠어요.
So in a way, what I ask the American people is find a way that's beneficial to the national interests of the US that could also be beneficial to the rest of the international community.
지금 기후위기 시대에는 세계가 더 협력하는 게 필요합니다.
For example, as we face climate crisis, we need more collective and cooperative action.
또 코로나 팬데믹 같은 것도 협력하는 게 극복하기가 쉽습니다.
So for example, in another pandemic like the COVID, you need collective action.
근데 현실은 그렇지 않았습니다.
But that wasn't what we experienced in reality.
이런 문제를 해결하는데 협력보다는 각각의 나라의 각자 살자가 더 강했습니다.
So what we experienced is each country was looking out after number one.
그러다 보니까 혼란이 더 가중된 겁니다.
And that created even more confusion.
그래서 그것은 어떤 나라가 미국이라도 조금 더 자기 나라를 넘어서는 사고방식을 가져야 이런 인류 전체가 문제를 풀 수 있지 않냐. 미국이 다 책임지려는 건 아니지만 미국이 어느 정도는 역할을 해야 되지 않느냐.
So we're not asking America to always be responsible for everybody. But having said that, I think America, just the very nature of its position, needs to have an international outlook.
꼭 그런 군사적인 어떤 파워로서가 아니라 어떤 협력을 주선하는 그런 역할은 좀 필요합니다.
Not as to through hard power, trying to make influence through hard power, but maybe serve as a platform for collaboration and cooperation.
그런 문제에서 저는 조금 아쉬움이 있습니다.
So that, I'm a little regretful on that, with the withdrawal of American leadership from that regards.
Yeah, I think that on that topic. So I agree with you on it, the international, so we're in agreement, but I was also explaining to you why it's popular in the United States to be more isolationist. But I think even as an isolationist, there was a very logical way to make a case with each country and renegotiate deals and renegotiate treaties. We didn't do that. We have someone we have a president now that we chose after seeing him for one term. We brought him back in. He's very impulsive and very much focused on how it affects him and what he thinks. As a personality, he's someone who wants everyone to come to him for a deal or an arrangement. So that's what we've chosen. So that's why you're seeing this. It's a shift in the world, but it's also chaotic because it reflects the personality of the administration. I think it wants chaos at some level, in my opinion. So it's created that, and it brings more power to them. You've got to come to them to get things resolved. Where I think if I were in your shoes and I was trying to say for Korea, how to negotiate that or how to communicate it, they're much more going to relate to, did we lose the relationship with South Korea to North Korea? Did we lose Ukraine to the Russians? Did we lose Taiwan to the Chinese? Do we look like failures? That's what they would care about, that, how it looks to lose in a win-lose world, which is a paradigm for which they're looking at things. So I think if I was engaging, I would communicate on that, and it's not the lofty idea of the United States doing the right thing and serving as a global coordinator on issues like climate change or security or global pacts is not, I think, in the DNA of this administration as much. So we'll probably take a new administration or a new Congress to shift that.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. I would like to invite people on Zoom in the room to also ask questions. So,
You may have to repeat the question, so if you can keep.
yeah,
it
maybe
concise.
if you don't mind getting a little closer to us,
To
maybe.
that,
Yeah.
to that, Al.
Yeah,
Just, I can kneel.
sure.
Yeah,
So I'm in the fifth book of the series, The Dalai Lama's Cat, which is by David Mitchie, which is, I think, a fun and somewhat humorous way, especially for cat lovers, to absorb the substance of his nonfiction book, which is called Buddhism for Busy People: Finding Happiness in an Uncertain World. And so, and the essence of Buddhism, what I have gotten from these books seems to be that we're called to make the people around us happy. So my curiosity is, could you make any general comments about differences between Korean Buddhism and the Buddhism of the Dalai Lama, which is now in North India?
역사적으로 볼 때는 태국이나 동남아에 있는 소위 테라바타의 불교가 있고요.
So from historical perspective, there is the Theravada Buddhism that's popular in Southeast Asia, including Thailand.
그다음에 한국이나 중국, 일본에 있는 마하야나 불교가 있고.
Then you have the Mahayana branch of Buddhism that's popularized in China, Japan, and Korea.
그다음에 티베트나 몽골리아에 있는 불교는 소위 단타라 불교, 밀교라고 보통.
Then you have the Tantric Buddhism that's popular in Tibet and Mongolia.
그래서 이것은 마치 그리스 정교, 가톨릭, 개신교 이런 것처럼 성격이 좀 다르고.
So they have different approaches and nature of their teachings, so dogmatic wise. So it's almost like Protestantism, Catholicism, Greek Orthodox.
그러나 대부분의 종교는 내용은 비슷합니다.
Having said that, regardless of what religion it is, the substance is fairly similar.
어, 시작하면 교주가 가르친 것은 어떤 복을 비는 게 아니라 자신의 어리석음을 깨우쳐서 마음의 평화를 얻는 길을 가르쳤습니다.
So what the original Sakyamuni Buddha taught was not really how to pray to gain wealth or health. It was how to achieve your own peace of mind.
그리고 굉장히 검소하게 사는 생활을 가르쳤고요.
And he taught us to live very modestly
또 겸손하게 사는 걸 가르쳤고.
and very humbly.
그러나 실제 종교, 현실에 있는 종교는 그렇지가 않습니다.
But the Buddhism in reality that we experience is not that.
부처님께 빌어서 자기가 많은 복을 얻고자
Because right now it's more about praying to the Buddha for some kind of prize.
돈을 많이 벌거나 지위가 높아지는 것이 복을 받는 거라고 생각합니다.
Because they want fortune from the Buddha, whether that's translated to more money or higher positions.
그러니까 현실의 불교하고 원래 가르침의 불교는 많은 차이가 있습니다.
So there's a huge gap between how Buddhism has materialized in today's world and what the Buddha actually taught.
이것이 뭐 어떤 불교냐는 역사적인 종단의 성격보다는 내용 면에서는 붓다의 가르침을 그대로 실행하자 하는 수행 중심의 관점과 세상에서 복을 비는 종교의 관점 이렇게 크게 나눌 수가 있습니다.
So regardless what type of Buddhism it is, what sect it is, you can divide Buddhism into two large different kind of systems. One, those who want to follow the original teaching as a practitioner, and those who consider Buddhism as another means for health and wealth gospel, basically.
복을 비는 불교는 일반적으로 종교로서의 불교라고 할 수 있고요.
So health and wealth gospel can be characterized as religious Buddhism.
그리고 그 차이는 뭐 불교 문화적 차이라고 볼 수 있어요.
And the only difference between different sects of religious Buddhism is the cultural artifacts that they live under.
그런 면에서 달라이라마는 그런 밀교의 전통 속에 있지만은 좀 더 세계를 보고 그 마음의 행복을 추구하는 그런 관점을 좀 더 강조하고 있다고 보시면 됩니다.
So I think Dalai Lama, while he is the leader of a traditional tantric Buddhism, has more of an international outlook as well as more practitioner outlook.
Anybody else? To ask a question? Well, you have more time to think about it. Anybody on Zoom? I can ask a question while you guys are thinking of your great question. So my question is, if you don't mind sharing, what do you pray for right now?
지금 기도하는 뭐라서 기도하셔는 뭐는 그렇죠.
저는 한반도의 평화가 제 관심사 중에 가장 큽니다.
My biggest interest is peace on the Korean Peninsula.
그리고 두 번째는 북한 주민들의 삶의 고통으로부터 좀 더 나아졌으면 벗어났으면 좋겠다.
Second, I want to alleviate the suffering of the North Korean people.
그리고 대부분 개개인들이 물질적 풍요 속에 살면서도 굉장히 스트레스를 받고 살기 때문에 좀 더 그 스트레스로부터 벗어나서 행복했으면 좋겠다.
So I want to also, teach individuals, us to, because we suffer in midst of such plenty, so that, I want to teach them to gain more happiness.
이렇게 많이 소비하는 것이 잘 산다고 생각하는데 이것을 생각을 바꿔서 적게 소비하는 속에서도 우리가 행복하게 살 수 있는 길을 찾아야 된다.
Because right now we think that more consumption leads to more happiness, and I think we need a change in that thinking so that we can be happy without consuming more.
기후위기의 핵심은 CO2 배출량의 과다입니다.
Basically, the key factor driving the climate change is CO2, right?
즉 소비를 줄여야 합니다.
That means that we need to reduce our consumption.
소비를 많이 하는 것이 잘 산다는 이 가치관으로는 이 문제는 해결할 수가 없어요.
As long as we hold on to the value system which teaches us that more consumption equals more happiness and better life, we can't get out of this problem.
그래서 이것을 계속 얘기도 하고 같이 생활하고 하지만은 저는 마치 마약 중독처럼 우리 인류가 지금 소비 중독에 들어있기 때문에 현실적으로 벗어나기가 쉽지 않는 것
So
같습니다.
when we talk about these solutions a lot, since we as humanity is actually addicted to consumption like a drug, it's going to be very hard for us to get ourselves out of it.
What I pray for daily is just sort of like a prayer of St. Francis, make me an instrument of your peace. Work through me. I really don't pray so specifically, it's more like whatever's gonna come into my life. Will come into my life and I wanna be ready and be of service. Cause I don't know the right thing to do all the time, so it's just whatever comes in my life, use me in the right way. And so that would be the overarching prayer. If there's a concern that I have right now, it is the culture of contempt in our country right now that I think could very easily tip toward violence and we would see a great unraveling, not only in the United States, but then, as we talked about earlier, a global unraveling. So I'm very concerned about the energy right now of tit for tat, contempt for contempt. And in our political system, if we knock them out, next time we'll get them when we get in, and when we get back in, we'll get them. And there's a grievance culture that scares me. And so we have our own civil war, our own crisis in the United States. I'd say that concerns me because every other solution, whether it's climate change or dealing with poverty or dealing globally, if we are at war with each other and it turns to violence, all those other things will be destroyed.
Anybody else like to ask a question? I think you have a question. No. Let's see.
I have a quick follow-up.
Mhm.
Follow up to
Bit of praise.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So a while back, Rich and I were talking about somebody that was known as the prosperity gospel. Was it from Michigan or there was some famous preacher that was associated, basically it was a get rich
Yes.
idea through religion.
Mhm.
Or maybe it was the preacher that got rich. But I was wondering when the Venerable was describing the two branches of Buddhism, was there any parallel between the getting rich or powerful branch and the Christian prosperity gospel idea? I don't know, either one of you.
Well, I'll amend your question. I like that question and I'll amend it by asking, are there Buddhist monks who are making a lot of money on that in, say, South Korea, as they are in the United States? Because the prosperity gospel in the United States, usually the pastor and the team are the ones who become prosperous, not the members of the congregation as much. So it's usually a Ponzi scheme. So I'm just curious if you have that in Buddhism, because I didn't know, we were sharing about earlier. Are there wealthy Buddhist monks?
한국 같으면 전통적인 큰 절을 책임지는 자리가 되면 아마도 경제적으로 많은 수입이 생깁니다.
So if you become an abbot of a large traditional, temple in Korea, you will become comfortable
관광객 수입이 많이.
because there's a lot of tourist fees coming in.
그런 경우에 부여의 승려가 있습니다.
And in that sense, you have wealthy monks.
또 그런 템플을 차지하려고 다툽니다.
And there's a lot of political infighting to be appointed as abbots to those money-making temples.
그러나 개신교는 교회가 그냥 개인 자영 회사 같으니까 열심히 해가지고 큰 교회를 만든다. 이런 거는 불교에는 그런 시스템이 아니니까 그런 경우는 많지 않습니다.
that's a little different from how Protestantism in Protestant churches are operating in South Korea. Protestant churches operate almost in a corporate structure. They're independent corporations or organizations. So they are more entrepreneurial in the sense they go out and create their own kind of, business. In that sense, they become wealthy, comfortable that way. The Buddhist governance structure does not allow that, but there is infighting to be the abbats of those wealth-making temples.
Interesting.
So for just technically, I can't see all 14 of you on Zoom, so if you could put your questions in the chat, I would appreciate it. But you did get a compliment, Jason, for your translation. Yes, I knew you did it. Oh, would you mind, I'm sorry, would you mind getting closer so people can, you don't have to kneel. Okay, so you can sit there.
The Reverend Tafel, you mentioned the culture of contempt that you're worried about. Also, Venerable Gongyo said, we just have to acknowledge that we are all different. We don't have to agree, but we should respect their different point of view. I understand that intellectually, but when you actually see people who are, I agree with what Annabelle was saying, who are actually harming people right in front of our eyes, or a leader who's extremely selfish and trying to grab everything, and people who are applauding such leaders, then how do we reconcile this in our intellectual understanding of we should respect all the different point of view. We shouldn't hold hatred and contempt. However, we are human beings, we have emotions, and we see the pain of other people who are being extremely harmed. And the bad influence of such leaders on our children, our next generation. How do we deal with this? How do we overcome this culture of contempt? Because I see that it's in myself as well, because I feel that contempt when I see those who are not thinking like us. So that's my question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the way I would approach it is. So you see people who are doing things that you disagree with. They're immoral, they're behaving badly, they're bad for kids to see. And so I would say, disagree with that. Work against it as we can in a democracy. Oppose them. Get people registered to vote, or whatever you can do in the system. So I've spent my life standing my ground and on issues that are very controversial, and I've gone against the group. So I think I respect that. So stand your ground on when you think you're on a moral issue. But where I see the breakdown is contempt is not a practical solution for change. It actually makes the crisis permanent. It leads to a cycle. If you were talking to a group of Trump people in the United States right now, they can tell you chapter and verse of every grievance of how they've been looked down upon. They've been thought they were stupid. They were dismissed. The elites forced this on them. The elites forced that on them. The people who live in the cities, the people who live in the swamp here in Washington, they would have a whole story of grievance. And that fuel helped elect President Trump to a second term. If we respond, and that's all we're talking about is just a grievance and a grievance and a grievance. So another president could, will, hopefully, because he's supposed to be term limited. But there would be a new president, maybe from the other party. But if the grievance maintains in our hearts, then that just means that for that period of time, that group will lead and they'll punish. And I've heard people say, I hear this all the time. People in both camps say to me, the difference between us and them is we bring a knife to a gunfight. They both say the same thing. And we need to bring a gun to a gunfight. So we have to be meaner. We've got to be nastier. we've got to be more aggressive and we've got to really destroy these people because they're evil. And when that comes, you're just escalating and it's going to go back and forth. And till one group says, we're not going to resolve this in democracy. We're going to solve this who has more guns. And so it descends into violence. And I think both sides can be looking for that, can be actually wanting that to happen. So I'm saying that compassion is a very practical strategy, like letting go, forgiving, which is a spiritual thing. You know, it was mentioned about Jesus saying, love our enemy. We don't really take it very seriously in Christianity. It's beyond us, but that's the call. And the reason it's very practical, forgiving is very practical, but contempt is a poison and it will corrode you and we'll be in this. And so right now, you're wrestling with it, but most people aren't. They're just in a contempt mode of, I hate them, whoever they are. And when I get my power, I'm going to dominate them. So I think fight for what you believe is right, but do it in love and compassion. And I think that people are craving a different way of just than demonizing.
By the way, I want to clarify. I struggle with this, but I don't actually believe it. You know, I feel like it is reconcilable, being protective of being or be harmed and compassion. And to give you an example, like if you're married and you don't talk to each other, you're going to end up in a divorce. I think it's the same thing socially. So as a society, if we don't talk to each other, we're going to end up in a divorce or civil war of some kind. And so I actually do believe that we have to do what you're saying is we can do it with compassion, like fight with compassion. So dialogue with compassion.
네, 우리 사람은 누구나 다 자기가 볼 때 부당하다고 생각하는 사람을 보고 그걸 나와 다르다고 인정하기가 쉽지 않다는 걸 저도 인정합니다.
So I recognize the fact that as human beings, we see injustice being perpetrated by the other, and it's hard to reconcile that.
뭐 남을 비난하거나 또는 남을 경멸하는 사람을 보면 우리도 경멸하기가 쉽습니다.
So if we see others having contempt for somebody else, we also hold contempt for that person.
근데 내가 경멸을 하는 게 이유가 있다면 그들도 경멸할 때 이유가 있을 겁니다.
So if my contempt has a rationale, then their contempt also has rationale to that.
그렇기 때문에 경멸하는 사람을 보고 저게 옳지 않다고 생각한다면 나도 또한 그것을 하지 않아야 합니다.
So if we see another person who has contempt and we don't think that's the right thing to do, then I also should not engage in the same contempt.
그렇기 때문에 그런 방식으로 안 하려면 나부터 다른 방식을 취해야 한다는 거죠.
So what I'm saying is, if I don't want to fall into that trap of contempt, then I have to strike a different path.
근데 우리의 행위에 어떤 동력이 주로 분노가 많습니다.
But a lot of our actions are actually motivated by anger.
분노하지 않으면 행동이 잘 안 나옵니다.
Because actions are tough without anger driving.
그래서 분노하는 사람들은 이 행동을 하기 때문에 어떤 파워가 생기고 권력을 잡든지 어떤 힘을 행사합니다.
So angry people act upon their anger. That gives them power. So sometimes they obtain that power.
근데 분노하지 않는 사람들은 행동을 하지 않으니까 사실은 세상에 대해서 어떤 변화를 추구하는 동력이 없어집니다.
So those people who are not angry usually don't act. So they don't be part of the drivers for change.
그래서 이 문제를 해결하려면 분노 없이 우리가 사회에 적극적으로 변화를 위한 행동을 할 수 있다면 이런 폭력적이지 않고 변화를 가져올 수 있지 않나 생각합니다.
So what if we can actually engage in societal transformation without anger? Then that we could actually bring the change that we want to see.
결론적으로 말씀드리면 분노 없이 어떤 변화를 위해서 좀 적극적으로 우리가 행동을 하자.
So how do we lean forward in our action without anger?
So we have two questions from Zoom. Would you mind reading both questions? And
Yes.
I want to try to combine them. From Ben and Makiko. Yeah.
Ben asks, what is bringing you joy and hope at this time? And Makiko writes, thank you very much for this meeting. My question, how do you protect your peace of mind while not being seduced into denial or false hope? In other words, how do you, as spiritual leaders, guide people to keep their perspective?
우리가 어떤 짧은 시간에 관찰하면 성공이냐 실패냐 승패가 나타납니다.
So if you look at a phenomenon in the short term, there's always win or lose.
좀 길게 관찰하면 성공이냐 실패가 아니라 그냥 우리의 목표를 향해서 나아가는 전부 과정이 됩니다.
But if you look at things in the longer perspective, nothing is really a success or failure. It's just part of the process for you to arrive at a certain destination.
그래서 사안마다 성공 실패의 관점에서 보지 말고 좀 이 우리의 목표를 향해서 나아가는 그 과정은 수많은 실패를 통해서 성공으로 나아가는 과정입니다. 그래서 실패라는 말이 과정을 보면 실패라는 말은 없어지고 그냥 연습이다 이렇게 볼 수 있지 않을까.
So if you take a long journey, look at things, then a failure is not a failure. It's just another step towards the ultimate destination, the ultimate success. So I think we need to develop that longer term outlook and focus on the journey, the process.
저는 개인적으로 이런 관점을 가지고 있습니다.
So that's the perspective I bring bear to my work.
지금 내가 하는 일은 시합처럼 최선을 다합니다.
So I engage in what I do as if I'm actually in a game, in a live game.
일단 일이 끝나면
But once it's done,
그것은 연습이었습니다.
it was just a practice for me.
그러니까 지금까지 이전은 다 연습이고 지금은 시합이고 지나면 그것도 연습이고 시합이고 이 말은 최선을 다하되 결과에 연연하지 말자는 뜻입니다.
So everything I've done so far is just a rehearsal. And when I engage in something, that's the actual live play. But even when that's over, it becomes a rehearsal. So that means that I focus on the process, not on whether I succeeded or not.
이런 관점을 가지면 실패는 없습니다.
With that perspective, you never fail
모든 것은 다 경험입니다.
because everything becomes an experience.
그 경험이 쌓이면 다시 더 성공의 확률이 높은 쪽으로 나갑니다.
And with the more experience you have, the higher the probability of you reaching your destination.
이렇게 되면 조금 현안에 좀 덜 좌우되는 그런 평정심을 유지할 수 있지 않나.
That allows me to anchor myself in some type of equanimity, no matter what happens.
Would you like to answer that or answer the next question? Which is about how do we create culture of compassion?
So read it out loud.
Sure.
I agree that we can respond to contempt individually with compassion and forgiveness. But cultures are collective. How do we build a culture of compassion and forgiveness when our own individual actions are relatively small compared to the whole? Great question. And want me to start?
Yes.
Okay. Never underestimate the power of you deciding to do good, for you living a life of love and compassion, for you doing good with whoever you meet, wherever it is. That's the only way it ever starts. There is no collective. It's always just one person who decides, I'm going to approach this with compassion, not contempt. And somebody else says, oh, I agree with that. It seems like you're living a better life, a happier life than I am. I want to follow that too. Oh, it works. I'd like to try. You will lead by example. And so don't wait. There's not going to be a group, and it's not going to come from a political leader. That's another, I hate to burst people's bubbles. It's not coming from a political leader. It's going to come from spiritual leaders probably, and it's going to come from you. So when we each begin to change the way we behave, it does create change, and we have really no idea what the ripples are. I'll tie that back specifically to the question that just came before in my own life, which gives me perspective, is that an issue that really changed me is something we talked about over dinner tonight before we got started, which was HIV/AIDS. I was involved with the HIV/AIDS issues in my 20s, and I was visiting people who were dying every 2 months, every 2 months, every 2 months. And it looked hopeless and it was polarized. The Democrats were marginally interested, Republicans were, some of them brutally unsupportive. And by using a strategy of engagement rather than, and I have no background in public health, no background in politics. I was working as a minister at the chapel at Harvard. So I had none of that. But I found ways to engage people from the other side with compassion and education and common values. That issue went from Republicans in the 80s ignoring the issue under Ronald Reagan to a Republican leading the PEPFAR program. Now we have a Republican undoing the PEPFAR program. So you have the battle never stops. But the point really is, I've seen really horrible things in my life, and I've seen great change. And so we're in a moment right now where we can look at the situation very realistically, not put a ribbon on it, don't make it, don't do spiritual bypass. It is what it is. It's a bad time. And then what good can we do in the moment?
법률적으로 주어진 권리, 즉 차별에 대한 자기 권리는 저는 적극적으로 행동을 하는 게 필요하다고 생각합니다.
So I think it's really important for us to act on our given legal rights against discrimination.
시민으로서의 의무도 중요하지만 시민이 자기 권리를 충분히 이렇게 누리려고 해야 이 사실은 민주주의나 평등이 이루어집니다.
So civic duty is important, but your exercise of your civil rights is really the foundation of democracy.
그러나 문화적인 것은 사실은 쉽게 바뀌지 않습니다.
But having said that, cultural transformations are hard.
그래서 시간이 많이 필요합니다.
It takes a long time.
바뀌어야 되지만 시간이 걸린다는 것을 인정하고 바뀌지 않는 늦어지는 것을 어느 정도 수용하는 자세가 필요합니다.
So I think we have to understand, acknowledge that cultural transformation is a long-term effort and not be too impatient over the pace of change.
왜냐하면 이 문화적인 것은 우리가 어떤 바꿀 강제적 수단이 없기 때문에.
Because there's no enforcing mechanism to drive change when it comes to culture.
그래서 사실은 좀 어렵습니다.
That's why it's a difficult task.
Well, this is the third time I think we had this dialogue with Venerable. And I feel like it just gets richer and better and more important. The stakes are higher. That we're able to maintain dialogue and friendship with each other. And I think that could be a start of a cultural change towards more compassion. So, thank you for coming. Thank you so much, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, bye. See you guys. Okay.